And it looks like the recording has started. So thank you, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to Illuminate and to the first virtual CARL conference presentation. Today I'm going to be focusing on the issues of critical thinking and developing workplace skills as I taught through a variety of information literacy courses. My name is Carolyn Schubert, and I'm the Health Sciences and Nursing Librarian here at James Madison University in Virginia. But most of my work related to today's talk is going to stem from work I had done in California about a year or two ago. And so while a lot of us have gone through and dealt with critical thinking, information literacy, development of skills regarding evaluation and searching, a lot of my questions regarding where to go, what skills do my students really need, kind of stem from the community college background where I started working. Now, for a lot of us, we're used to teaching the familiar, the databases interfaces such as EBSCO, and learning how to navigate, how to search, how to leverage the information that students find within these resources. However, the web, searching through Google, is not quite as easy, doesn't have as many facets, and isn't nearly as reliable as the information we provide in our databases. So how do we prepare students for something like this? Seems like a decent housing option in Seattle for a little under $600,000. If we use any traditional methods of trying to understand the value of this, we can see that the person in the right-hand corner, Klaus Gosma, he has a lot of 5-star ratings, so that seems reputable and reliable. But for those familiar with kind of the American context, the April 1st special is the clue that this isn't real, that this is one of the April foolery jokes that can pop up on the web. But are traditional information literacy components really encouraging students to critically evaluate a resource that they stumble upon like this? A lot of times I was finding difficulty in understanding if students were able to gauge this level of satire or humor, or even question beyond how well the design was. But more importantly than understanding April Fool's jokes, I also wanted to know, how are we preparing students for interfaces like this electronic health record? Now, electronic health records have a user interface, are built on a database structure similar to the relational databases we're used to and familiar with. And while we can understand how they operate, are we really translating the actual key points of understanding how information and information systems work and digital systems? Or are some of the information literacy skills that we teach a little too limited in their scope to just the traditional methods of print media? So today we're going to make sure that we can define and understand the wider array of information literacy skills and other literacy skills that are needed to be successful today, both for personal success and professional success. I'm also going to discuss a little bit about the couple of institutions in which I had worked as the way they organized their information literacy programs and impacted the research that I did. And I'm also going to go through and evaluate some of the new instructional strategies that I had created and assignments, and kind of compare them both to some traditional information literacy assignments, as well as delve into how particular geographic or institutional context influence the success or complicated nature of an assignment success. So the ACRL information literacy standards are kind of the backbone for most information literacy programs, courses, and even our one-time instruction sessions. And these have been around since about 2000 when they were originally approved. The Core for Information Literacy focuses on making sure students can identify their need for information, that they can access the information, that they know how to evaluate it, either within their own knowledge base or at least in comparison to other resources they find as part of that information search. That they also make sure that they can then apply that information that once they've evaluated it, as well as when they apply it, make sure they apply it ethically, legally, etc. But in the intervening 12 years, there have been a variety of other components and shifts in the way we access, use, deploy, and generally everything we do with information has changed. One of those big shifts has been the shift towards a digital literacy. More or less, digital literacy is being able to do information literacy sorts of activities and skills with digital tools. So using digital technology to locate, evaluate, use, but also create information. The Obama administration has actually been doing a large push, investigating and trying to support digital literacy. And some of those components of digital literacy focus on computer basics, internet basics, web searching, content evaluation, mobile and wireless technologies, as well as making sure people are informed about health information that they can access via digital media, as well as job opportunities. Now, the importance of digital literacy stems from the fact that it is an increasingly large component of work. And not just the IT field, but in a variety of fields, the internet is becoming more and more common, a requirement, and used on a regular basis within a job. And it happens to be a segment of an economy that's growing. And especially over the last several years, that is huge. So making sure that people are digitally literate opens up many more opportunities and doors for them to be able to participate and engage in society and in the workforce at this level. Now, in addition to work, digital literacy is also becoming increasingly more important as personal information is more and more often transferring to an online format. Some of the components that we're finding is more and more healthcare centers are migrating to electronic health records and making patient records available online for patients to access and monitor their own personal health status. So making sure people can understand how to navigate, how to access their personal health information can empower them to understand the health care that they're receiving and understanding what they can do to help themselves. Even government agencies like the Department of Motor Vehicles are moving a lot of their more routine sorts of activities online. We're doing a driver's license, trying to find some basic forms to register a car. Components like this are becoming more and more online. So for those who are disconnected, are being put at a disadvantage. And there are some very strong realities with this digital divide. These statistics are provided by digitalliteracy.gov, the government website focusing on digital literacy, and it's still somewhat shocking numbers, with over a quarter of Americans not using the internet at all. That means a quarter of Americans not participating in the online forums, not participating in access to their health care, etc. And those who do, there are still a large number who don't have broadband internet access. Now, while dial-up still allows them some connection, it does severely limit the amount of access that they have to a variety of different resources. And to a certain extent, to be expected, there are specific demographic groups, such as people with disabilities, minorities, and seniors, who are more affected or more likely to be affected by a digital divide scenario. This next literacy is visual literacy. So again, for a long time we've been talking about how much information there is. There's an information flood, an information deluge. Always it's too much information. And so one of the things with visual literacy is taking a lot of the standard components of information literacy, making sure that you can understand an image, access an image, apply an image effectively, create images, relate to visual literacy. Visual literacy is also being able to take a lot of data and describe it in a visual form, simplify some of that process. So the image we see here is a periodic table of visualization methods. In the left, we can see some pale yellow columns that represent some of the more basic diagrams, so pie charts and tables that are methods of visualizing information. Whereas on the right, we also have things like knowledge maps or learning maps, which are very different graphical presentations of information, but are all necessary to understand as a visual literacy. Now, as of October 2011, ACRL has also come out with their own visual literacy competency standards. So the first one is very similar to the first component of ACRL's information literacy. We want to make sure that students understand the need, when they have a need, and what that need is when it comes to information, whether it's information in the traditional sense or information in the visual sense. The second option, or the second standard, is also very similar. So we want to make sure that they can find and access this information very effectively and efficiently. Now the third and fourth break out a little differently. The third standard focuses on understanding and interpreting and analyzing the meaning of images. With textual media, the books, the journals, the websites that we're accustomed to using in information literacy instruction, literacy is literally being able to understand the text. However, visual components provide several different layers of understanding and meaning. So we need to make sure that a student can understand what is encoded, what information is encoded in a graphical form. How can they parse that so that they can actually understand the overall meaning of the visual media. And the understanding has to come first before they can take the next step of evaluating the image and their sources. The fifth competency is making sure that they can use the visual media effectively. Standard kind of matches up easily and nicely with our fourth information literacy standard. Our sixth component for the visual literacy competency is, however, takes a very strong shift away from the former information literacy standards. The sixth competency focuses on understanding design and creation. The traditional ACRL standards focus primarily on students as users, consumers of information. The visual literacy takes a next step and transitions to also focus on students as creators of content. And finally, as they're creating it, we still want to make sure that they're doing it ethically, legally, socially, kosherly, etc. And so far we've kind of talked about these different, very siloed sort of medias. Now for visualizing some of the digital divide data that I provided before, here are two different types of ways that you can graphically represent that information. On the left, we have a simple bar graph. We can see that the total is easily out of 100%. We see about 28% in orange, matching the no category, and the remainder being in the yes Campbell-Brown category. And so we know that the total is out of 100. We have a key that can help us identify which is which. And we understand at the very bottom what this is about. So who doesn't have internet access and who does. The second one, a scatter plot, is presenting the exact same data, but in a different way. And this one is a little harder to tell what the total is out of, as on this scale, we have 80 as the top. At the bottom, we just have numbers. We don't really have identifying terms. So how does this impact one's understanding of the total, of the source of information in this graph? Now this visualization translates into much more complex topics. In the medical field, one of the growing trends has been the use and deployment of forest plots. So a forest plot, like the one we're seeing right now, tries to collate a variety of different data sources and help inform quicker decisions. So by combining 5 different studies and assuming that each study surveys, at least 100 people, that would be a low estimate. In one image, I can understand whether a particular type of intervention either helps a patient, has no difference for a patient, or actually harms a patient. However, we need to address what are these different shapes for? How do the lines vary in length and why? So that as a student and as a future practitioner is looking at this information, how can they make a really good informed decision regarding this graph? So we've talked about a lot of different individual literacies that have either been information literacy in its traditional context, visual literacy using visual media resources, digital literacy using digital tools, and finally we're reaching transliteracy. So not just using each of these in one siloed, standalone system for evaluation, but making sure that students are developing the critical thinking skills so that they can translate skills from one literacy to another. There's a lot of parallels between these, but changing the media, changing the format, changing the context can be very challenging for students to shift gears, if you will, when it comes to making sure that they're literate in these platforms. For example, this is a screenshot from an article published in Wired magazine as I look at it on my iPad. With the iPad, there's a variety of layers of engagement. We have a static image of a human torso that's trying to demonstrate the perfect pitch. We have text that's informing us of the different steps as well as the general background of what a perfect pitch is. But as we also know what the iPad is, it's an interactive device. So for getting students to be able to also think about how they can interact with technology, the perfect pitch isn't just the wind-up. Using this particular media, using your finger to scroll left and right will go and show you step by step every piece from the wind-up to the release, and everything in between and its impact on the body. So I know we've gone through and kind of did a lot of review of a lot of different literacy and ideas. And so I want to take a minute or two to kind of reflect on what we've just covered and think about what it is that you may already be encountering and just haven't termed it as such. So I'd like you to either provide one issue that you see your students struggling with that you think could be categorized as either a digital, visual, or transliteracy issue. And you can either type that into the chat window or along the the side of the whiteboard, there is the letter A and a square box with lines that will allow you to enter text directly onto the screen. Also, if anyone has any questions at this time, feel free to raise your hand or to enter them in the chat window. Interesting. So I see one question that's come through from Adam about the reluctance to use media in their research. And one question I would have would be, is it reluctance because of this on the student's behalf, or are there instructions from professors that perhaps lead them to think that they should only be using print resources? I'm seeing Adam and Juliana note that professors are strongly encouraging mostly the use of print resources. And this may be something that changes across institution to institution. I know earlier this week I was getting questions about how to use or how to cite TED videos that the professors had provided. Well, great. I'm going to move on to the next segment of the talk. If there's things that come up in between, we can also review those at the end. And some of these components are greatly affected by institution, where you are, what you're doing, what you have access to. So I started out my career at a community college, Contra Costa College, up in San Pablo, California. And as you would somewhat expect from a community college, it has a large percent of its population over the age of 24. It is in an ethnically diverse area, so we have a lot of various minority groups, Hispanic, African Americans, and Asian students who are attending and participating in the courses. Which, when we think back to the digital literacy component and some of the notes that we saw there, this is a population that was definitely affected by digital divide, meaning that these are students who were not only limitedly or not connected at all, but then also by not having connection, not having an opportunity to develop those digital literacy skills. And we're getting to do so only through their coursework. And Cal State East Bay has the slightly more stereotypical image. This is data regarding their 2005-2006 freshman class entering. So 87% of the freshmen were 18 or younger, and everyone was under 25 as entering freshmen. The ethnic diversity being the Bay Area, so Cal State East Bay is located in Hayward. It has a very diverse mix of students. Now at Contra Costa, their information competency program had a variety of components. One was that this course was a requirement to attain the associate's degree. This was required for graduation. So a large majority of the students you saw going through this program were taking the course. And we offered the satisfaction for that information competency requirement through a variety of different methods. One was through a half unit or up to a 3-unit self-paced course that was taught via workbook and WebCT. For those unfamiliar with WebCT, that was the very old version of Blackboard, its predecessor. There was also the 1-unit 8-week hybrid course that would involve 2 in-person meetings and then the rest of the work being completed over WebCT. Or students could pass an information competency exam to test out of that class requirement. I have been at Contra Costa for about 2.5 years, started as an intern, and during my internship was exposed to the workbook and WebCT self-paced course, as well as the information competency exam. The main course that I was involved with teaching were the 1-unit 8-week hybrid courses. Now, across those 3 different options for satisfying the requirement, was the backbone of what we call the CLICS chapters. So each chapter focused on different components of information literacy, following the ACRL standards. There were 10 chapters, and then there were 10 chapter tests. Various questions from the chapter test directly connected to our student learning outcomes and were used for assessment. That way we could make an assessment of the learning across the different courses. Now at Cal State East Bay, they also had information literacy as a requirement as a general education course. But it was normally taken as a freshman. And freshmen at CSU East Bay experience a very different sort of learning community. In the attempt to help freshmen stay in school and keep the retention rate for freshmen higher, they created freshman learning communities. So basically, these learning communities were organized around interests and around a theme. So generally, they were organized into like humanities, natural sciences, or social science type clusters. So there would be a cluster on language and culture, or atoms and energy. And so these students who would have a similar interest would generally be also taking a lot of the same courses together. So more or less, they would be moving almost as a cohort through their freshman year, and which would definitely help with their retention rates, as they had that peer support. The information literacy course was taken as one of the courses required during that freshman learning community experience. So it was a 2-unit course that they took during one of the quarters that they were there. Now, with the nature of instruction being the way it is now, nothing is purely done generally only in person. Online courses are becoming a more and more important part of the program. At Contra Costa, the hybrid programs stem from the need to teach at off hours. So not the traditional 9 to 5, but evenings, and have self-paced options over the weekends. Well, to be able to meet that need, as the librarian teaching the course, whether I knew it or not, I was teaching digital literacy skills. One of those first 2 sessions was primarily focusing on getting students to where they needed to be. So a lot of that required going over information such as what's demonstrated on this slide, making sure that their computer could handle working with WebCT, that it had the right browser, had the right software such as Adobe Acrobat to access the database articles, as well as Flash Player to watch the videos that have been created to show them how to access the catalog, how to use the databases, what things to look at with a website when they're doing an internet search. And we would also have to spend time going through and showing them how to access these videos. Not just the basic where is it, but making sure that they were comfortable streaming videos in an online setting, using the play, using the stop, using captions if they needed captions. Going through and using the assignment Dropbox and making very clear, explicit definitions of what was expected. So some of these skills, like knowing how to name a file, understanding differences between file types, are all digital literacy skills that for many of these students, this was new or challenging. In one of my sections, I found that out of about 30 students, 17% were not able to follow these instructions regarding file names and file formats for their first assignment. Now they had several assignments they would do throughout the 8 weeks, one for each week, so they had time to practice it repeatedly so that they can really learn it and feel comfortable with this. But this kind of just demonstrates we can't assume everyone's online and everyone is totally comfortable using these sorts of resources. But it also lets us know that as librarians teaching these courses, we're kind of already doing a lot of digital literacy just because of the nature of what teaching in the university environment today is like. We also have to go through and clarify how to access assignments, how to submit assignments, and also how you can determine that something was submitted successfully. Now, at the community college setting, I had somewhat anticipated this, where I had slowly learned about the digital divide and the realities of this. And given the different age groups and the rumors of, the kids who were born with laptops, assuming that they would be digitally literate, made me think that East Bay, with 87% of freshmen being 18 or younger, would be totally comfortable in a digital environment. Now, Cal State East Bay is a slightly interesting story. When I had started there, through kind of an error in paperwork, I ended up not having access to their Blackboard website until the first day of class. So as a stopgap, and because I tend to like to be prepared, I used what I had access to. Now, I had access to their email system, which they happen to be running through Google. So while I couldn't access Blackboard, I could still go in, access my email, look at my students, and chose to create my library course using the Google platform. So this is a screenshot of what that library information page would look like, as it was broken down week by week. However, for many of these students, this was different. This was new. Accessing the site was fine, but when it came to trying to use other components of Google, like Google Docs, for sharing, submitting, and receiving comments back on assignments, ended up being one of the more tricky components. So here's an example of a student paper. Finding things like the share button would normally take a few emails at least to be able to effectively communicate with a student. Now, while this isn't the traditional method, the issue of cloud computing is a growing trend. A lot of offices are moving and migrating towards either Google platforms or SharePoint type platforms, and the way we work with documents and collaborate on documents is evolving. So in this context, I was able to introduce them to a new method of working with a Word document, collaborating on a document with another person, and how to receive feedback. So with so much digital literacy already going on, it might be good to take a minute to reflect on what are some of the digital literacy skills that the learning management systems you're already using, like WebCT or Blackboard or Moodle, are teaching your students. At the same time, think back to two different work-related experiences where digital literacy skills that are required at work also required additional discussion or training. How many times has there been a conversation about not using all caps in an email? Or what's an appropriate thing to email versus have an in-person conversation about? Also, if there's any questions or comments at this time, feel free to use the chat window. I will stop talking for the next couple of minutes. Yeah, I see that Kenley has commented that the president is very interested in the use of infographics and would like to see if that can be taught as well. Adam also notes that these systems seem to demonstrate that to students how information can be organized. Yeah, one of the challenges with just teaching the issue of file names and uploading and downloading is just the basic organization. It works very differently than just being able to hand a paper file to a professor or refer to it in a physical media like that. But where you save it and how you name it, and also having to be aware of how other people are using it, creates a whole other pattern of behavior where they have to critically kind of think about not just how they're using it in the moment, but the longer-term ramifications of some of their work. So a lot of these transitions in terms of how we think about information, how we think about organizing it, and how we can go about approaching what information is and how we consider it in our realm of our knowledge base, brings me to also the question of social media in the news. So when we traditionally talk about evaluating news resources, journal articles, peer-reviewed resources, we've been using those terms for a long time, and they've worked as a kind of a blunt tool to help cut the wheat from the chaff. However, the way we organize information is definitely changing and evolving. So by introducing students to short video talks through TED, like this one by James Surowiecki, When Social Media Became News, this isn't so much focusing on, wow, social media was interesting. This is when Facebook became really popular. But talking about what is authority for a news article? Is authority the person who's in a distant area but is reporting on it? Or is it more authoritative, the tweet from the person who is actually standing on the shores dealing with the tsunami? Now, for a lot of my community college students, social media, just introducing them to it was a big step, as they were at the point where digital literacy was still a very new and developing skill. So just being cognizantly aware of it was one huge component. Whereas for my Cal State East Bay freshmen, most of them were on Facebook. Many of them were on Twitter. Most of them were before MySpace. But they were aware of these things, but had never really thought about the larger impact social media can really have. And so creating assignments or creating questions like this can give them a few moments to actually step back from the environments that they're in. As social media has matured over the last several years, we can see it popping up in Fox News. We can see it popping up on CNN. We can see it popping up and being used and almost acting as a protagonist itself in major events like the Arab Spring. And so having students kind of sit back and think about things that they're already hearing about, things that they're already encountering, whether in the news, as they read it online or in print, whether they watch TV news, whether they talk with parents or their family members or other adults. It's coming out in different ways, and it's supporting information distribution and our understanding of events in different ways. Now, social media doesn't replace the New York Times, but it does raise some interesting questions to think about. What is the information that you need? Now, one of my other components was taking traditional copyright. Now, copyright is complex and scary and frightening, even for my faculty members who I still get questions from. But we tend to approach it in a lot of the same traditional information literacy sorts of ways. These are two questions from Contra Costa information literacy assignments. So kind of engaging a student's understanding of fair use and copyright between an entire book and a short essay. The same question, again focusing on the entire book and short essay, was also replicated and provided as part of the assignment for the Cal State East Bay students. And what we kind of see here overall is that a larger majority from both Section 1 and Section 2 more or less understand that you can't copy an entire book. But when it comes to looking at copying an essay or a small section of a book, it gets a lot more complicated. They have a much harder time grasping the differences between those concepts. Now, is it because they just assume that if you copy anything, then it's a violation? Or are they just, what is it that's actually not being understood? And those questions just aren't very well designed to gauge their level of learning or understanding of these copyright concepts. And the results were very similar at East Bay. Question 1, most people understood you can't copy an entire book. I'm imagining small yays being cried out there by librarians everywhere. However, it's almost evenly split by their lack of, or their difficulty understanding fair use and small passages, being able to use small parts of a book. So why don't we try it another way? So I decided to do copyright the remix. So instead of just talking about plagiarism in the academic sense, photocopying a book, not photocopying a book, I wanted to try and meet the students where they were. So what you're seeing is a clip of the Gray album, or the Gray video. Back in the early 2000s, DJ Danger Mouse, now of somewhat popularity, mixed Jay-Z's The Black Album and the Beatles' The White Album, hence making Gray. And so by mixing those two tracks together, he kind of created this new sound. It was really the birth of the mashup. Now this video is a lot of fun because they also went through and they mashed up Jay-Z's video and the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. But there's other examples of copyright infringement, intellectual property infringement that I took from the news. Things such as speeches being plagiarized by political candidates, newspaper articles plagiarized by journalists, unauthorized use of a song in political commercials, stealing design ideas from top fashion houses like Versace, or even just how does Glee work? They have all these popular songs that people know and love, but is that totally ethical? And raising the question. By taking it out, taking plagiarism out of the academic only context, I got some really interesting responses. One of the greatest things I found was the way they were able to apply the knowledge to their own existence. So, being that part of this happened last year, I got a lot of parallels drawn between the stealing of an idea and the Facebook story. Now, I think most of that was because of the movie, not because of prior knowledge of the Mark Zuckerberg and Winklevoss twins scandal. But it was something that they could take the knowledge and understand it within their own context, or understand information that they already had and see how it translates back into their own information system. Other interesting examples that came out of their quotes were drawing parallels of African American music. How songs, how singers' voices, how recordings were taken and put someone else's name on. They also pulled out information such as the shutdown of LimeWire, the music swap service. And one even brought up some interesting questions of what is stealing? We've heard the cliched quote of, a good artist borrows, but a great artist steals. So how does the stealing in art in that context relate to our ideas of copyright and intellectual property today? Is there a more complex relationship with art and copyright than there is with engineering, say, designs? And it started engaging them. Again, these were not components that I asked as part of their responses. This was additional information they were choosing to incorporate and connect with to understand and deploy these concepts. And here are a couple of sample student responses. Now, one of the other components was working with the Google setting and getting a little overwhelmed with citations. I also wanted them to develop some of the more visual literacy components and, by default, digital literacy components through presentations. I had seen people who had struggled with creating presentations, who had created presentations but never gotten really quality feedback on what their overall message was, not just the content written on the slides, but also how were you designing the slides to support your argument, or what things are you doing in your design that inhibit your ability to communicate to your audience. So I gave them the general outline of either using Google Presentation or PowerPoint to share their presentations with me, since we were meeting in an online setting, that they needed to use kind of a mixture of images and text. And this was a summary of the research they had been doing throughout the rest of the quarter. So the research they had been doing in the catalog, the articles they were finding, things like that, being summarized as a presentation. So some of it was also having to dedicate some time to telling them what good presentations were. So slides such as this indicate what's a bad table. So this, even on here, hard to read, too much data. To actually go through and make any sense of this information, it's going to take you more than the 30 seconds to a minute that the slide will most likely be up. And giving them that feedback. What's wrong with this? Why doesn't this work? This information stems from the effective presentations put together by Yale Medical School. So this was one of those resources that was used to kind of help inform and make them think about what works, what doesn't, and why doesn't it work. And at the same time, wanting to make sure that they understand that presenting information is a skill. It's not the tool. So PowerPoint itself is not the end-all and be-all of presentations. Part of that was also introducing them to Edward Tufte's PowerPoint is Evil. And it's not evil because it means to be. It's not evil because it's owned by Microsoft. It's evil because it tends to make presentations dry and dull and boring. So part of this is going through and having students critically think about not only just how do they make PowerPoint work, but what is a good presentation about? Is it about just writing things on a slide or on an overhead transparency? Or is it about engaging with an audience? And so this is a good example that came out from one of my students' papers, who is investigating some of the controversy around Islamic veils in the U.S. So here she was able to find a graphic, use it appropriately, not overwhelm the slide with text, clearly identify what it is we're looking at so we have an idea and a context of how to read the image. but I still had a lot of students struggle with this concept. This example shows a lot of text. The text in the bottom left corner is overwhelmed by the background, so you have great difficulty being able to even read it, and kind of makes it a challenge to piece this together. And at the same time, looking at what this is, understanding this happens to be images of Japanese internment camps in California during the Second World War, you also have to point out and indicate that butterflies as a background are not an appropriate template for this theme of a presentation. So the images you associate, you want to be working with your presentation, not against, or not distracting away from. So it's an ongoing process that could definitely use some more development, but these are some of the ways that approaching visual literacy can be done by a librarian in these information literacy courses. And finally, I also wanted them to start questioning the everyday. So this study by the Pew Internet started to question, what is it that we think others can see? Is it just who our employer is, photos of us, birth dates, etc.? And I wanted to understand, do students really understand who they are as content creators as part of this, and as part of their future moving forward with information literacy? Is that not only are they consuming it, but they are creating it constantly, whether they're cognizant of it, approving it explicitly or not. So I took them to a site called Spokeo. Spokeo basically merges together real-life data, so data from email addresses, phone book listings, real estate listings, and social network information. So your Facebook profile, your Twitter account, your Pandora information, to create, let's say, the Hulk version, social media web 2.0 version of a phone book to look people up. So I tell them, go look yourself up. Make sure you understand who you are and what you're contributing to the web in terms of content. Now, with Contra Costa students, taking into consideration that these were mostly students who are well over the age of 18, 10 students, so about half of this group, were able to find themselves in the database. 9 were not found. And I think this was pretty successful also because not only were students able to tell if they could or couldn't find themselves, but they also went through and engaged with the assignment. Not only did they say yes or no, but they also started understanding or drawing parallels between Spokeo and other person lookup resources, or understanding Spokeo and understanding what the data sources were. Some also were able to deploy alternative search strategies. So nicknames, names of family members, searching by email instead of name. So they were not only using some of the traditional evaluation skills, but they were also using alternate search strategies, which I thought was fascinating. Now, the Cal State East Bay was a little more complicated. And a lot of that is due to the context in which I was working. Again, if most of my students are 18 or younger, most of their information will not be available through the traditional research means. So looking up their name is not going to have a phone book listing, not going to have a real estate listing. And even though only 2 students found themselves and 17 did not, 13 of those students did a lot of those same things that I saw the Contra Costa students do. They were able to think of and deploy alternate search strategies. But they also were engaging with the information, questioning the methods of data acquisition, questioning who are the data sources for this assignment and for this search engine. So while they weren't creating it, they were being enlightened as to what the lingering ramifications are for their interaction, participation, and creation of content online. Because we're running low on time, I'm going to move ahead a little bit. These slides will be up on the CARL website for you to review again after this session. Now, I find myself here at James Madison University, and I am working with a very different set of student populations. Just about all the students are between the ages of 18 to 24. The ethnic diversity is not nearly as diverse as what I used to work with, but I'm encountering a lot of the same issues and concerns and discussions here regarding what is literacy today. What is the literacy we need to prepare students for moving forward in the future? And while I'm not teaching an information literacy dedicated course here, we are finding that the information seeking skills that we have isn't quite satisfying our requirements anymore. We're going through and we're currently updating our Go for the Gold and are looking to have a reborn phoenix sometime in the next year or two to address a lot of these new literacy standards. But in the meantime, I'm still being able to address digital literacy in the one-shot session, whether it's working with PubMed and having to teach students how to navigate so they can email an article to themselves, how they can create a file, how they can create a bibliography based on their research. Going through and working with them on the visual literacy. When they come across articles, working with them to understand how does this graph, this visualization of statistics, relate to the question I have at hand? How does this help inform my decision? And transliteracy. So not just working in one platform or one medium, but helping them understand that what you do in one, oh, that was a slide fail, that my transliteracy is trying to indicate that the way we search in PubMed is the same logic that we can deploy when we search in Google. That when we search across platforms, we know databases. As librarians, we know them, we teach them, we work with them on a daily basis. So whether it's PubMed, tried and true, or whether it's another social media database of information, the logic remains the same. Empowering students to understand and feel confident in that knowledge is key. Because we can't anticipate all the different interfaces they will be encountering over the next 10, 20, 50 years. And so finally, also working with students on how to deal with this. Currently I'm teaching a class all about electronic health records and health informatics, and find myself repeating a lot of the same lines. This is how information works. This is how information is structured and staggered. And that even components, not only just how to search or the tools of searching, but noting that things like the vitals, the BP in red, is a visual cue that there's something wrong. And that it's not just red because that's what the software says. It's encoding information into the system to help make you a better healthcare provider. So the real key to success is in the 21st century is going to be translating these various literacy skills across platforms and using a variety of different media. So the expansion of our information literacy programs to incorporate more than just ACRL's information literacy is going to be key to student success and preparing them for their careers and personal futures. Some of the things to note are also that you want to familiarize yourself with your institution's mission and student demographics, as this will also help inform the assignments that you either choose to adopt or create or change. as this will impact student learning and success. And that we as librarians, we have this unique opportunity to work with technology development, such as ebooks, e-readers, media resources, as well as intersect informal pedagogy, meaning that we can both work with students and be informing their literacy development, both in our one-shot and full course sessions. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat window.
Thank you, Carolyn, for the presentation this morning. And I just pasted in a link for an evaluation for this session, and I would encourage the participants to complete. And I think we can probably wait just another 30 seconds or so, and if anyone else has a question, you can just type it into the box there, and if not, we will sign off and end the recording. So thank you again, Carolyn, and we appreciate what you shared.
All right, so it looks like we don't have any other questions, so I will stop the recording. Thank you all very much for attending today's conference and helping pioneer the virtual conference session. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the conference.
Thank you again.